Next, we have the John Sullivan Auto Dealership expansion, the 950 Harder Parkway. Got Mr. Rodriguez.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the council. Arnoldo Rodriguez, Development Services Department. As Charles was bringing up the presentation, the item before you can this evening consist of a handful of entitlements, and they're all land use entitlements. One of them is the general plan amendment to the city's general plan. One of them is a rezone application. The third is a development plan, and the fourth one's the environmental assessment for the three aforementioned land use entitlements. So the project itself, it's a 2-acre expansion proposal by the John L. Sullivan dealership. They'd like to expand 2 acres to the west. The property to the west is currently vacant, and this item was considered by the Planning Commission on September the 26th, and at that meeting, the Planning Commission is recommending approval. However, they are recommending the removal of one of the mitigation measures as recommended by city staff, and I'll get into that in a few slides here. So the general plan amendment, the parcel itself is currently designated for office development. The applicant's proposing to modify that to regional commercial. It's zoned office. They're proposing general commercial, and the development plan is simply needed because they're proposing to develop 2 acres of land that were previously undeveloped. So the 2-acre site that the applicant is proposing to develop is currently part of a larger 23-acre site. That the 23-acre site is part of the Calvary Christian Center. That piece of property was previously considered and approved for development with a relatively large religious facility, if I recall, about 85,000 square feet. If this item is approved this evening, John Sullivan would purchase the westernmost 2 acres. However, that would not impact parking. It does not impact the site layout. The only thing that it would impact are some soccer fields or the outfield of a baseball diamond and a small portion of a soccer field, and I'll identify that. So in terms of an aerial photo, here's the site itself. The John L. Sullivan dealership, the existing site is identified right here. The red area is obviously proximate. It's not precise. However, that's roughly the 2 acres that they are looking at. And so just a zoomed in site, to the north of it's obviously Colusa Highway. To the south is River Valley High School, and then there's the remaining 21 acres. So here's, and so I apologize if it's not extremely clear, but this is the site plan that we have on file that shows the approved site plan for the religious facility. You'll note that the parking flanks the church on 3 different sides, and this is a softball diamond right here, kind of highlighted in gray. And then this is a soccer field, so again, a portion of that would be removed, but again, it does not impact the facility itself. So at some point, the church will have to come back to the city, will amend the site plan. However, it doesn't really have any direct impacts to their facilities or their uses. It just impacts some of their open space. So the site itself, this is a John L. Sullivan existing dealership right here. To the north is pointing up, and so their expanded area is simply to accommodate an additional 400 cars for ultimate display. So the vehicles themselves, they obviously need the space. They're expanding. They're a growing business. They're obviously doing very well in Yuba City. We like having them in Yuba City. We think they're a great partner, and one of the things they're looking at is simply for additional storage for their vehicles. Currently, they have 2 points, or they currently have 1 point of access, which is currently on Harder. As part of this, they are proposing a 2nd point of access. However, the 2nd point of access is going to be on Spirit Way. The 2nd point is simply for their delivery trucks and to either enter, to deliver vehicles, or to pick up vehicles. So it's not for public access. So in response to the public notices that we sent, and at the Planning Commission hearing, we did have a couple of individuals that approached the city and said that there is obtrusive noise in the area that's being caused by a couple of the car dealerships in the area and some excessive lighting. And then also, previous to that, the city had received some concerns specifically about the parking of delivery trucks on Harder. We've addressed these issues with John L. Sullivan at the meeting on September the 26th. He approached the podium and he indicated that he would take care of that. And to this date, we have not received a single complaint or concern from any of the community members. So I'm going to speculate that he addressed them exactly how he said he would. The only real item of concern for city staff for this project is that there was historically a relatively large valley oak tree on the property along the western boundary. Some of the reports that we received was that it was approximately 48 inches in width. Depending on who you ask, I've heard that it was as old as 160 years old. I've also heard that it was 120 years old, so I'm not too sure exactly. However, any tree that's 48 inches in diameter is a relatively old tree. City staff, the Jolly L. Sullivan dealership did contact staff in October of 2017. We requested that they commission an arborist report. Shortly thereafter, probably a month or so went by, and then we received a notification that the tree had been removed. So at that point, staff was taken aback a little bit because we had not received a copy of the arborist report, and we hadn't, up to that point, we didn't have direct contact with the Sullivan dealership. So again, the tree was removed. The arborist report that's included in your staff report, if I recall, it's dated November the 13th of 2017. That arborist report didn't know that the tree was damaged at the root, and therefore they removed it. So the city does have a general plan policy that identifies the preservation of valley oak trees. And so because of that, city staff is recommending mitigation for the removal of that tree. So the tree, again, is 48 inches in diameter at a drip line of about 40 feet in diameter. And again, the tree was removed in late 2017. Unfortunately, we don't have the specific date because I'm unaware of when it was removed, but we know it was the latter part of 2017. This is an old aerial photograph, simply highlighted with the yellow arrow is the valley oak tree, which when the Sullivan dealership was initially approved, they had protected the valley oak tree. And there it is. That photo was probably taken a few months prior to it being removed. And so this is the previous site plan. And I simply want to identify that shows the curb line right there in terms of the tree being protected. So one of the things city staff did is we reached out to various cities across the state, and we discussed different options in terms of how they appraise oak trees. One of the common methods for appraising oak trees was employing the Council of Tree and Landscaper Appraisals guidebook. When we ran the numbers, the mitigation came out to slightly more than $17,000 for the mitigation of that tree. One of the things that city staff is proposing is if the applicant prefers not to pay that, then we would recommend that they plant an equivalent number in terms of dollar valuation of oak trees on site, or a combination of that. So they could pay a portion of the fee, and they can plant some of the trees, or if they'd like, they would simply take the money, give it to the city, and we've committed to using those dollars to plant oak trees along the new park that's planned just to the north, probably about 500 feet to the north, adjacent to the water tower or the water tanks. At the Planning Commission meeting, after fairly extensive discussion, the Planning Commission recommended 6-0 to not include the mitigation, and that was primarily because the applicant, it was disease, it was damaged, and it was a health and safety issue. And they felt that there was an immediate need because a couple of branches, I'm not sure if it was a branch or a relatively large branch, had fallen, and it damaged, I believe if I recall, 2 vehicles of customers, and it nearly hit a customer. And so because of that, they felt that there was an immediate threat, so they did remove the tree. So with that being said, just a couple of things about mitigation. Any mitigation does have to be roughly proportional to the project itself, and we cannot mitigate or the goal being that you're only mitigating to pre-project conditions. You're not adding additional mitigation to go pre-project mitigation plus more than that. We felt as staff that the proposed mitigation is appropriate. It's a universally accepted standard for mitigation for tree appraisals, and that's why we went with the figure. So with that being said, we incorporated that into the document. So staff this evening is recommending approval or adoption of the environmental assessment, which does include mitigation measures. And we're also recommending that the City Council approve the general plan amendment as proposed by John L. Sullivan. We are recommending that, or we're introducing an ordinance to rezone the approximately 2-acre site, and that the council this evening waive the first reading. We would come back at a future City Council meeting for the second reading, and we're also recommending that you approve the resolution to approve the development plan. So with that being said, that concludes staff's presentation.
Thank you. I'll bring it back to the council for any questions at this time. Mr. Rodriguez?
I'll go for me.
Yeah.
Arnaldo, is there any mention in ordinance or in the other agencies that have the same policy for trees that are going to die anyway? Is there any accommodation for that? That seems to make a lot of sense to me.
You know, I have not studied exhaustively a lot of other ordinances, and so I wouldn't be able to tell you.
Is there mention in ours?
No, there is not mentioned in ours. Ours is not housed in our zoning ordinance, rather it's housed in our general plan.
General plan?
Yeah.
Okay. And the standard by which we came to the figure of 17,000 or better, what was where?
That was
On
employing.
your slide, I missed it.
Oh, okay.
I missed
I'm
it.
just going to back up here. So we employed the guide to plan appraisals by the Council of Tree and Landscaper and landscape
Right.
appraisers. And there's a formula. We simply filled in the formula based on the information that we had available to us.
And the heritage oaks, that's the what this applies to in Yuba City, is that correct?
And this would be a valley oak specifically.
valley oak?
Yeah. Yeah, valley.
So, do we have a tally or an inventory of trees that this would apply to in the city?
We
Any idea how many?
We do not.
Do not, okay, thank you.
No.
Any other questions? Yeah.
To the mayor. So, Arnaldo, how many trees is $17,000 worth? How many trees is Mr. Sullivan gonna have to purchase to cover one tree?
I think it largely depends on the size of the tree. If it's a 5-gallon tree, if it's a 24-inch box tree, if it's a 5-gallon tree, 36-inch box tree. Valley oak trees, they're relatively expensive once they start getting into the 36-inch box trees. I know at one point we had reached out, and I apologize for not having it in front of me, but we had reached out to Home Depot, and it was a handful of trees. I can't recall if it was 5 or 6, but those are some of the larger trees. But then you include transport. Someone actually has to
Right, I
install
understand.
them. So I wasn't
the
including that. I was simply
planning.
looking at the cost of the tree. So obviously there would obviously be some additional costs that we would obviously take into consideration. The goal of the mitigation is obviously not to punish. So the dealership, we understand that according to them, the tree was diseased. However, we're simply following general plan policies that states that we should try to preserve them.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? No? Okay, so at this time, I'll go ahead and open it for a public hearing. Anyone who wishes to speak on this item may come. And if you can state your name and address.
My name is Mal Montoya with Borges Architectural Group. We're the architectural firm for do this. Mr. Sullivan apologized. He can't be here tonight. He did attend the Planning Commission meeting that we have. And I guess I just want to point a clarification. At the meeting, Mr. Sullivan did speak to the tree. The tree was diseased. It did fall and damage some cars, almost hit an employee and a customer. So, and I'm going to kind of rephrase some of the things Mr. Sullivan said at the Planning Commission meeting. He probably should have notified the city first, which he did not. But it was a liability issue. And as he stated, if that had fallen on somebody or damaged anything, it's not the city that's liable, it was him. So he made a decision to have the tree removed. At the commission, and I guess I'm looking for clarification, because at the Planning Commission meeting, staff did recommend the mitigation measures. Mr. Sullivan spoke about that. It was a unanimous vote that there would be no mitigation measures, that it was well within his right to protect his property and his employees, et cetera. So is now the recommendation to reintroduce the mitigation measures, I guess is the question I have after the Planning Commission. Mr. Sullivan has agreed per the city landscape ordinances that we will plant trees along Spirit Drive as part of the 2-acre expansion. I believe all the way to Harder up to the edge of where his 2 acres are per the city guidelines. So anyway, I guess that's all I just wanted to point a clarification as to if that's being reintroduced now as a measure for Mr. Sullivan after the Planning Commission.
Arnaldo, can you go ahead and speak on that just for clarity?
On projects that are presented before the city council on when items are not appealed. So in this case, because the project does include a development plan, a rezone, and a general plan amendment, the appropriate avenue is that the legislative body takes action on that, and at the same time, you would be acting on the environmental assessment. If, however, this project was simply a development plan and the purview or the approval body would be the planning commission, this project would not be coming before the planning commission or the city council for consideration this evening. However, so it's not that we're reintroducing it. The planning commission was simply a recommendation to the city council in terms of how to handle this.
Thank you. Anybody else like to speak? No? Okay. Go ahead and close it. Close the public hearing, bring it back to council for any further discussion.
Madam Mayor, may I just
Yes.
ask a question of Mr. Rodriguez for clarification? So I understand the answer to the question the gentleman asked is yes. Yeah, so that's the short answer. With regard to the recommendation before the council this evening, as presented, is it addressing the question of the mitigation fee? Or no, that's separate and apart and they'd need to address that separately?
Correct.
Okay, so that your council understands that. So the recommendation that you have before you is essentially, and correct me if I'm wrong, what was presented or recommended by your planning commission, not having the mitigation fee in there. And just so I believe why Mr. Rodriguez has emphasized this as part of his charge as your development services director and mine as your city manager, is to faithfully implement your general plan. It's your constitution for the growth of the community. And so when something like this comes about, obviously we reflect on it as staff as, we need to figure a good procedure for the future so that this doesn't happen again. Because it's an awkward situation where a private enterprise is trying to do something to protect their property, and we're trying to do something to protect heritage trees in the community. Because it's part of any community's identity having trees that are 100 to 140 years old. Now, don't get me wrong, a community can make the decision and say it's not a community-wide concern, and it is an individual right of a property owner, and could have it removed from a general plan. But the fact that it's in there requires us to bring it forward to you, and that's why it's here before you tonight. So why is it coming back to you? It's because of that matter, okay? Thank you.
So Steve, a follow-up to that, I would ask, I was on the planning commission when Sullivan's project came originally. And obviously I'm not going to remember all of those years back, but I am wondering in that original report if that was documented to indicate that the removal of these trees would need to come through the city for that approval and so forth prior to any removal. I'm not going to remember all of the details from the original project, so.
So the staff report, if I recall, was in 2014. The staff report was silent relative to the tree. The only place that I could find documentation regarding the tree was this site plan. So this is a zoomed in area of the only place that I can find discussion of the tree where it identified it. So the red area there was obviously my markings just to identify the area. And so the only places there's some language there. However, the environmental document and the conditions of approval are silent relative to the tree. And there was no discussion. Again, so the only place where I could find it is in this area here.
Any other questions, concerns, motion? Yes.
Yeah, through the mayor. Mr. Sullivan, he was concerned about his vehicles, employees' welfare and customers' welfare. He took upon himself to take it down, take the tree down. But then he did get an arborist report, and it did say that the tree was diseased. So myself personally, it's just me speaking. We have 4 of the council members here. I don't think Mr. Sullivan should be punished for $17,000. He's willing to plant some trees from point A to point B, for beautification, we could maybe come to some different agreement here or something like that, but I don't think Mr. Sullivan should be punished for $17,000 when he's adding on to his building and bringing money and bringing folks here and helping the community selling cars and trucks in our community. So that's just me speaking, but maybe we can do something about that. And yeah, he's gonna plant trees. I don't think it has to be $17,000 worth. He's gonna plant it, like I said, from point A to point B.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments, concerns?
Through the mayor. Just my comment that the Sullivan dealership has expanded tremendously since they've been in our community. Currently parking vehicles, primarily pickup trucks, down on Highway 99 and Reed Road, far off site, and not a very secure location given the overall location of that adjacent to the highway. So I think this project needs to move forward. I believe we can come to some type of an agreement in which some oak trees can be replaced on property for beautification, and also as part of the mitigation. I would agree with the comments that $17,000 worth probably is a little high on my estimation, but whatever they're going to do is going to cost them regardless. And depending on the type of trees that they're going to put in, I would just recommend that whatever those trees are, that a portion of those be replaced with valley oak, and we just try to move forward in some type of an agreement that would make it palatable for both the city and for the dealership itself.
Any other comments? Yeah.
If I may. I just want to echo the same sentence that the previous two councilmen have mentioned, that $17,000 plus seems to me to be a lot of money. They made good faith effort to protect not only their property, but the safety of their employees and the public. The tree was going to die anyway, and so many documents before this. I think it is a wonderful learning opportunity for us to ensure this doesn't happen again, and perhaps we can tighten up the language in our general plan to address this exact circumstance, to where what are we really saving if the thing's already circling the drain. So the root of the problem, thank you very much, is that we need to get to the update that general plan to address that exception, which is a very it's not really amazing, just it's interesting that it wasn't there before, because that can happen. It's realistic. Sullivan is fully willing and already has stepped up. They're going to be a good neighbor and volunteered to plant some oak trees on their property. They get to enjoy the benefit. They're paying for them. That's reasonable to me too. How do we get there from here, though, navigating through all these processes and the general plan and whatnot? But that's the way. That's my opinion, which I think is pretty much the consensus here for all of us.
Yeah, and that was why I was asking about the Planning Commission, the original project, because if we're being silent about it from the beginning, then here we are in a situation. So either we need to be very straightforward with it, and it needs to be brought up at the point when the projects first come up, that these are things that we will look at very closely. And if we're going to be silent about it, this is where we're going to be with it. So.
Yeah, in terms of a condition, if I may simply make a recommendation, would rather than stipulating the fee of the $17,000 plus, then I would simply recommend that the mitigation language reflect that some of the trees that are required to be planted simply be valley oak trees, and we just leave it at that. And what we can do is that we can work with John L. Sullivan, we can work with their landscape architect, just to make sure that they're appropriately spaced, just make sure that they have the opportunity to grow. Because if you plant them in a small planter, obviously valley oaks grow extremely large, and we simply want to can just give them that option. So that I think would be appropriate. And at the same time, we're still collectively as a community staying true to the general plan, and simply seeing that the mitigation dollar or value is not necessarily a check submitted to the city, rather it's simply in lieu they're providing the trees on site. And I obviously think that would be appropriate.
Arnaldo, excuse me, Tim Hayes. I'm just looking at
He
the
woke up.
mitigation language, and it lists as an alternative,
He had to plant some.
in lieu of the dollar amount, the alternative states, as an alternative, the applicant may plant a comparable amount of oak trees on the subject site. So we already have that language. I don't know how we're going to quantify what comparable amount of oak trees are. But my point is that language is already there as an alternative mitigation. In lieu of the dollar amount, the mitigation would be to require the applicant to plant a comparable amount of oak trees. And so I think staff can use that language and work with Sullivan and come to an agreement on that. So I think we've already got the language there.
Yeah.
Based on what I'm hearing the council saying.
Man.
Yes.
The only thing I would say on that, and I agree completely with you, Tim, is that if it comes to less than $17,000, so be it. We don't want to plant a tree for the sake of planting a tree. As long as they have the proper and the room to grow and the space to grow, even if it's 2 or 3, so be it. We don't need to hold them to that number just on principle.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the council's made it clear we don't want to be holding to the dollar amount. Rather, the language just says a comparable amount of oak trees.
Right.
And we'll leave that to staff and Mr. Sullivan to work out.
Now on that, Tim, what's the definition of a comparable amount of oak trees?
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking 100, 120, 160 years.
I think staff and Mr. Sullivan can reach an agreement on that, Manny.
Okay, so would it be up to council to make some type of price limit? I mean, because, it could still be $17,000 for.
If Mr. Sullivan's dissatisfied, I'm sure he'll be back here before you.
Okay.
Okay, and I'm sure
Okay.
we don't want to see that happen.
Okay.
So
All right.
we'll work it out.
Thank you. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Tim.
All right. Any other questions or discussion or motion?
Now, how are we gonna do that motion, Tim, for the,
We've got the language is already there in the
Right, so just-
recommendation. I don't think we need to change any language. Staff has received direction. We're going to utilize the alternative mitigation
okay,
instead of the dollar amount.
okay,
We're going to adopt the recommendations as stated.
okay.
I don't think we need to make any changes.
Yeah, because there's no dollar amount in
The,
our recommendations.
the way I interpreted a comparable amount of oak trees was $17,000 worth of oak trees. That's the way I read that. So I don't know if that's the case or not. Who wrote that? The way I read it.
Yeah, I can, on council's direction, I can go in, can modify that.
Okay.
And because it's such a small modification, that item would not have to come back to the city
Okay.
council. And I'm confident that between city staff, his representative and John O'Sullivan, we can come to an agreement.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay,
Does that help clear things?
I sure hope so.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
I hope everybody's happy.
So unless there's further discussion, do we have a motion?
Well, I'm trying to figure out how to word it.
How do we gotta word that again, Tim,
Recommended.
please?
As recommended
Just
by
adopt
staff?
staff's recommendations. We're not changing any language. Just adopt the recommendations as presented in the staff report.
As recommended, because it's in here. And then he'll change.
I'll just say move to approve staff's recommendation.
Yes.
I'll second it.
Exactly. Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye?
Aye.
Any opposition? Great, thank you.